Welcome to the Swine TV Roundtable on swineweb.com. We've got a great innovative panel today to talk about hot topics in the pork industry. First guest, Dwight Mogler, pork producer from Mogler Farms in Iowa.
Hey, Jim. As Jim indicated, I'm a pork producer, but our family is a diversified farming business, traditional row crops, corn, soybeans. Actually, my father and grandfather were more focused on the beef feedlot, and pork was kind of the segue for my generation to have a future in the family business. And that was back in the mid 70s. Now we're working on working our next generation. So I have two son-in-laws, a daughter, two nephews, and a niece that are all family members, along with a lot of other key members that are part of our business. And the business has also evolved into a grain elevator to source corn. We also source soybeans, but really about having enough feedstuffs for both the cattle and the swine operations.
We got Jessica Ingo, production manager of Seaboard Foods in Kansas.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me. I grew up on a cattle ranch in Colorado where we produced hay, so swine was kind of unknown for me. I moved to the Guymon, Oklahoma area about 10 years ago. I started as a vet tech with Seaboard, and I've moved into the sow farm production role where I am responsible for 70,000 sows, and then I have some genetic sites as well.
And we got Chad Leman, pork producer from Leman Farms in Illinois. Can you get an bio there, Chad? So we've also got Brad Green, pork producer from Greenway Farms in South Dakota.
Hi, everybody. Brad Greenway, my wife Peggy, and I, we run a diversified farm here in South Dakota, corn, soybeans, wheat, similar to Dwight in our pig farm. We have a son that's back and his wife, and then we also have a longtime employee. So we're pretty well fully integrated part owners in the sow barn, finish the pigs, and then we're also part of Holstone Farms now, which is a packing plant. So kind of all the way from fully integrated all the way through, which is kind of exciting for our farm.
We've got Dr. Lauren Glowzenski, manager of veterinary services at Trioak Foods in Iowa.
Yep, so I reside here in Southeast Iowa currently. I work for Trioak Foods based out of Oakville, Iowa. I've been in this position almost 4 years now, overseeing the overall herd health of 74,000 sows, nearly 2 million market hogs across 5 different states of business. I'm a 2016 graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, and I was actually awarded the 22 award for Young Swine Veterinarian of the Year by AASV this year. So I'm very proud of that. Really happy to be here, Jim. Thank you.
Well, congratulations there, Lauren.
Yes.
So Dwight, I know foreign animal disease preparedness, that's a concern for you. What should we do to prioritize this on the farm?
Yeah, so actually, it's really an extension of what is part of our culture anyway, and that would be biosecurity, because really at the farm level, that is our best and first line of defense in our world, is making sure we strengthen our biosecurity protocols. And we've been pretty good at that. Not that there isn't room for improvement at the sow farm level. In fact, I made reference in my introduction that our family got in the business back in the mid 70s. We were a shower in, shower out facility since I was 11 years old. Now that facility's been retired. But really the grow finish side has been our main focus on biosecurity. Quite frankly, not all of our caretakers who take care of pigs, and we have a lot of contract operations, were raised in the same biosecurity culture, those of us who have kind of cut our teeth at the sow farm level. And so that's been a big focus for us, is just getting our people to understand that the threshold of their barn and even the entry to their site is really the first line of defense. Now, I'm also involved in both the Iowa Pork Producers and the National Pork Producers Council, more of our integrated and unified efforts in the industry. And we will never get done being prepared, but every day and every year that goes by, we're more prepared than we were in the past. And so, as is any battle, if we ever go to war, we had better have a good battle plan. And it might not be the battle plan we use, God forbid, we actually do have an event, but this is becoming front and center for us.
So Lauren, this is a topic of interest for you. You think now's the time during peacetime, is that right?
No doubt. I mean, the more we can do ahead of time during peacetime, the better for all of us. I know that we all would be in agreement on this panel that biosecurity is of utmost importance, right? If we can prevent PED from entering our barns, I think we can prevent African swine fever from entering our barns. But we have huge gaps today in the United States that really concern me as a veterinarian. And we're working within our company, but it takes all of us as players in the game to work together to ensure that we keep things out of our barns and we don't spread it around. I know I've heard things about Seaboard, you guys requiring showers at your finishing barns and you're not renewing contracts if they don't have showers. And I think that's where we need to be. And certainly at Trioak, we have a gap there. And with new contracts, I think that's where it's going to need to come from with the contract producer. But it's more than the shower, right? It's dead removal. It's all those other contacts. I have a lot of concern with our labor force. It's getting more and more consolidated. We're relying on Hispanic labor. They're living together. There's a lot of crossover on the weekend, loadout crews, vaccination crews. I think it's huge. So I see a lot of head shaking. Maybe others have something to comment here, but the more we can do in peacetime, the better. No doubt.
So if I could just follow up a little bit, as an industry, we really need to help our neighbors and our fellow producers understand the importance of this. We certainly can lead by example. And, at the bare minimum, obviously, premise IDs for all facilities, which quite thankfully, the pork industry has embraced this for quite a number of years. As I alluded to in my introduction, the dynamics of the beef industry are quite different. And so we actually should feel good about what we've done with having our sites registered and our premises identified. But far beyond that, secure pork supply plans, being part of US SHIP. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with US SHIP, it's a pilot project that a lot of the pig producing states, those who are predominant, have embraced. It's gotten some USDA funding. In fact, there's the second meeting of delegates as we speak going on this week in Bloomington or the Twin Cities. And that is really about in the event we have a foreign animal disease event, if you will, how do we get back to clear status, meaning being able to move pigs in the zones if we're in a zone? How do we move pigs out of the country as far as exports go? And how can we validate and verify to our export customers so that they have a high level of confidence that we indeed are exporting meat that is free of disease? And so the US SHIP program will be extremely important in restoration of our export channels.
So Lauren, you talk about, you think it's the producer's investment that needs to be the focus. The government won't solve the issue.
I think that goes with anything in life. We shouldn't rely on the government to solve our issues, especially in this business. It's your investment as the producer. I just think of it, if I put that barn up, hundreds of thousands, multi-million-dollar facility, wouldn't I want to do everything to protect that? Because I do think the government could come and shut it down. And that's my greatest fear for our producers. You put all that money into it, all that capital, and the government could just come and shut it down if African swine fever came into the facility. Who knows how long it would take to leave the pit. I just think it's in the best interest of the producer to execute good biosecurity now and put those stop guards in place to prevent disease from coming into their barns, to protect that investment. Don't rely on the government. I just think, we have these programs in place, they're contingency plans. How are we going to get back to business continuity? But it's certainly not in place to protect the farms themselves. I mean, we have the secure pork supply in place. Those are individual site biosecurity plans. I don't know if that answers the question there, but I wouldn't rely on the government. I just think we need to take it right there to the site level, have the stop guards in place, enforce good biosecurity, prevent the normal diseases that we deal with in the US, like PRRS and PED, from getting into your barns, and you can prevent those foreign animal diseases.
Yeah, welcome back, Chad. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I apologize. I'm not sure what happened, but I lost you all, and I think Jessica was talking when I dropped out, so I apologize.
Yeah, do you want to give a brief bio of yourself, Chad?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Jim. Leman Farms is in Eureka, Illinois. I'm the third generation to raise pigs, produce crops, and we also have a Pioneer dealership that we've had since '91 when I graduated from high school. My oldest daughter recently graduated and has come back to the farm. We, like I said, raise corn, soybeans, market about 110,000 pigs a year. Most of the feed is milled here at the farm. We utilize about 10 contract growers spaced throughout central Illinois to finish our pigs. And then we have maybe 4 different sow sources where the pigs come from.
Now, I know, Chad, you talked about lack of expansion in the hog industry due to labor, material costs, and Prop 12. Where do you stand with that right now?
Well, it's kind of interesting. Typically in the past, when hog producers have been profitable, we generally expand ourselves right out of it about as quickly as we can. And it's just a really interesting dynamic to see now that I believe we're all struggling with labor and being able to find really anyone that wants to take care of pigs. We're still, while we are becoming more and more automated, it still takes human beings walking through pigs to identify problems and fix problems. So it's interesting, we really can't find the labor to grow or expand. Material costs continue to be very high. And so we don't hear of much building going on. And then I just think the uncertainty of Prop 12, and maybe, I don't know if some of you alluded to it while I was gone or not, but just the uncertainty of where that's going, I think has made a number of us pause with expansion and say, let's get this figured out before we make this huge capital investment to grow.
So Jessica, labor shortage, you talked about that on the management level specifically. And then there was an idea, or how do we retain college grads and set up successful management and training?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm sure maybe it's different for you guys. We're a large corporation, but we are struggling from a labor shortage from, the animal caretakers all the way up into management roles. We have TN visas that we have on the farms that have been successful, but we struggle with our local people, with the people that, are from the United States. Like, how do we get them to see what the ag industry, not just the swine industry, but the ag industry as a whole, like, what do we have to offer? And like you said, there's a lot of people that don't want to work out on the farms all the time. And so how do we attract them? And so for me, like, labor shortage for us is like lack of the younger generation coming through. And so that's where I go into the retaining college grads. It's like, what are they looking for in a job? And a lot of them want the stuff that's not normal for the ag industry. They want mental health stuff. They want one-on-one mentoring. They want, they want solid communication. They want leadership. And so, setting up an MT program that is designed to have all of that, because we can't keep doing the same thing that we've always done, or else we won't have anyone. And so I'm also interested in, like, what are you guys doing, or what are you guys seeing that helps from a management level and from retaining these college grads, these younger kids, to get them out into our workforce and see how awesome the ag industry actually is.
Well, I guess if I'd make a comment, I'm just wondering, Jessica, do we as producers or as an industry need to actually get into the college and the technical colleges? And, because there's so many generations removed, a lot of those students there have never had any exposure, and maybe they're thinking what ag used to be. I'll leave it that way, and is it something that needs to be a priority for, whether it's pork board or MPPC? And I know they do some of that, but make it a huge priority. And even as producers in our own area, to go to your schools and try to get in there, might even be in high school, and give them some background of how farms have changed and how exciting it is and the opportunities available. And so I think it's bestowed on all of us to do a better job of getting that next generation an idea how agriculture's changed and the definite need and a lot of good things that can happen if they would be part of our industry.
Right. Yeah. And like, we go to colleges and we do the recruiting thing, but I'm not sure if we're hitting the right market of kids. It's those high school kids that may not want to go to school. and they have an ag background, but they don't really know, because I didn't know that this was even a career path. And so are we missing a window of people that could be very successful in the ag industry?
I'll just make one more comment on that. I serve on the board of South Dakota Board of Technical Colleges now, so it oversees our 4 tech colleges. And a statistic that kind of surprised me here in South Dakota, there's 30% of all graduating high school seniors in South Dakota out of 9,500. Again, we're not very highly populated, but there's 30% of the high school seniors right now that never go on to any further education. You know, and whether that be a technical college or 4-year college or whatever degree, you know, is there something? I mean, you know, there are just a lot of people, not just be for future employees, but, you know, get them into some ag science programs and show them that, spark that interest. And so there is a lot of students out there that I think that we need to tap yet.
Right.
Especially because the industry is so diverse. There's so many layers that you can work in, from marketing, sales, vet, doctor, HR, and I think it's underrated. Now, Lauren, you talked about a TN visa program.
Yeah, and just to comment on that, I mean, I saw a very interesting statistic at MPIC. I think it was the Wendy's executive who presented it, but in 1840, 70% of individuals would have experience in agriculture, versus today 1 to 2% will be working in agriculture. So we have a huge gap, you know, just not even exclusive to the swine industry, right? It's agriculture in general. There's a huge disconnect, and getting to students as early as possible would be really important for the local labor. Think about that gap between 18 and 21 for our drivers, CDL drivers. I think that's huge. If we could get that age pushed down to be a CDL driver in the United States from 21 to 18, we could capture an enormous part of our labor force, in my opinion. Same goes for, you know, labor jobs on the farm, management. We need to be getting those students in high school and showing them that this is a career path, because it's a very viable career path, especially in the swine industry. And certainly, you know, I hear the TN visa program there at Seaboard, similar to us. We're a big corporation. Local labor feels like it's been drying up. It's created a lot of frustration. So we've relied a lot more on TN labor visa program for the past 2 years. So I'd say the past 2 years, Trioak has had an enormous force of TN labor employees coming in from Mexico. A lot of our farms have gone from primarily Caucasian to 100% Hispanic in that time period. So incredible cultural change, big change for our company. That's all that I could really say about it, is like we're relying more and more on that, and it's incredibly politically driven. There's a lot of concern there. For me, just as an individual, you know, how long does that last? What does that look like in the future, especially in the positions that we're putting people in? Is that really what the program's designed for? Would be a concern as well. We'll see, but we're certainly reliant on that labor force, and I think it's just going to continue to grow, because local labor really does feel like it's drying up, and that might be the gap in education that we need to really work to close as an industry.
And I think you talked about a more concentrated pool of people, and then you can speak to the App 15 outbreak in central Iowa.
Sure. So we were part of that APP 15 serotype outbreak. Maybe you guys are familiar with it. In central Iowa, there was a couple dozen sites that were affected with APP 15. We were one of them. We only represented one of those sites in the sample. When we dug into the biosecurity on that, we felt it was very much people driven. We thought it was due to our loadout crew. We lost 50% of the lot of inventory that was left in the barn at the time. So it was incredibly frustrating to me as a vet. It's a preventable disease with good biosecurity. So when we dug in, we found that there was panels being moved site to site. So we had a dirty, contaminated panel go from one market load straight into our barn, break the farm with APP, incredibly costly to our business, and really showed us a really obvious biosecurity gap that you would think wouldn't even exist, right? Do not bring equipment site to site. Seems so obvious, but there's a gap there today that's affected multiple big producers, right? Not just Trioak, but you can just look in the top 10 and find others in there on the list that would have been affected as well. So concentrated labor force. We have these vaccination crews, loadout crews, even the caretaker going site to site during the day, managing across different companies. And I think that we are kind of turning a blind eye to it. And I think we need to really recognize that this exists and how we're going to close the gap. It probably comes from just very good site-specific biosecurity, requiring a shower, requiring a change of clothes, having the equipment there that's dedicated, making sure that the caretakers have the supplies they need to get the job done in the farm. But I do think it takes recognition amongst all of us as companies. just that exists, and how are we going to close the gap and come together and work together? We can see sites on the same section less than a mile away, and that guy's just going site to site. This APP break was just really representative to me of a gap in people biosecurity because it was so concentrated. I mean, these sites broke within a 10-mile radius in Iowa. If it was anything else, it would have been much more widespread because we just have so many pigs and it's so densely populated. So for me, people are huge. We need to recognize that, and we need to just try to close those gaps and make it, put the stop gaps in place. Just put as many stop gaps in place so we can stop the disease from walking into the barn. But I think we do need to recognize that. So maybe you guys can speak to it too. I mean, I don't know if you see that on your farms or making sure you have the equipment available. What do you all see?
Yeah, so at Seaboard, we've really made a push with the loadout crews. I mean, anybody who touches all of our sites, we've really made a push to segregate, have individual equipment. And again, it's all due to like the people doing what they're supposed to be doing. And the shorter we get in staff, the bigger of an issue we're going to see, because we just keep pushing and pulling people here or there. And are we creating more damage than good by doing that? But for Seaboard, we have made a huge push on the loadout crews, specifically in the finishers, because there's so many barns and so many people touch them in a day.
All disease lives at the slaughter plant and then comes right back to the farm, right? So we know it's there and it's hitting our loadouts. We just need to put those prevention steps in place and execute, like you're saying, right? We were so reliant on people just executing the basics.
So Brad, I know you're passionate about talking to consumers and the public about agriculture. So what is it? How can farmers continue to communicate and not confrontational?
It truly is, and I'm going to go back to when I was on the National Pork Board. I had Penny come up with what was called Operation Main Street, and we took that training, and again, you go around and you started talking to civic groups, and I'll just use one example here in our hometown. As rural as we are, it's still to get a barn permitted. I don't care if it's a finishing barn, a sow barn, or whatever. There's just people that did not understand, how farms had changed and what we were doing. And so it was kind of an eye opener. And there was a fellow there that always wrote letters to the editor about the pigs. And it just so happened one time I was speaking to that group, and I didn't get confrontational with him, but we went through the presentation, just explaining what we do on our farms today. And when it got all done, I asked if everything had been answered, and it had been, and there was no more letters to the editor. And I think sometimes that we take for granted that everybody understands what we do and how farms have changed. And that's absolutely not the case. And so I've had a number of opportunities since 2005 to probably visit with 150, 200 groups all across the United States to even overseas, from dietitians to vegetarians to whatever. And I think the thing that they need to be able to connect with you and don't assume that everybody understands what we do. And I think probably the most frustrating thing to me is when I see on social media, or whether it's Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and you see farmers just coming unglued at some consumers because they don't understand. That does us absolutely no good. And so don't think that your neighbors understand what you do anymore, and don't know that, you just have to get the message out. And however we do that, and honestly, the COVID kind of shut down some of the speaking engagements, and I truly did enjoy doing that. But now what they're doing is we're doing a number of virtual tours. And so it might be, it was a vet class in Texas A&M, or a nutrition class, dietitians down in Louisiana here a month and a half ago. There might be a speaker down there, but we do a live tour of the barn. And so, some of the questions, if you can get out to those audiences and just, again, agriculture's changed. We've done a very good job, and I'm very proud of the improvements we've made on our farms. We've just done a darn poor job of explaining to the consuming public of what we do and the reasons that we do it. And so, whether you're talking about antibiotic use or environmental concern, try to relate to that audience some way, whether it's they're taking care of a pet and we're taking care of livestock, or they're, taking care of the environment, we're doing the same thing. And so try to relate to them, but don't be controversial. It's so frustrating as a producer to see that, knowing that there's just a lot of good questions out there. And when a farmer comes back at them, they thought, you think they're going to ask a second question when they don't get very good reception when they ask the first one. And so it's truly something I'm passionate about. My wife and I, we do a number of them. We'll continue on. And I think that it really helps when we go to zoning hearings. They have a better idea of what's changed. We just got our sow barn permitted. We're like explained before, we're going from 48,000 sows. And at that zoning hearing, there was about 2 questions and they were just good water use and things like that. But it wasn't a big uproar like we've had in the past. And I think there's a lot of people that need some credit for doing that, of just helping understand, educate, if you want to say, or have a conversation with people in our area. So now they understand it. It makes it much more receptive. So.
Is there one thing we can do better to communicate?
What's that?
I'll let Chad go. Go ahead.
Okay.
I was just, Brad, I couldn't agree more with what you said, and I appreciate your efforts to cast a truthful and a positive light on hog production. I think the other thing that is incumbent upon all of us is site management, and how do our sites look to just the passersby? Oftentimes we're along main highways, and I just cringe when I see guys pulling out with mud all over tires and spreading it all over the roads, and unmowed lots, things like that. And so I'm always, I think some of my employees get tired of me reminding them about it. But keeping our sites, I think we got to hold ourselves to even a higher standard than others because of what we do. And so I think that ties in a little bit with that public perception that you're alluding to.
Absolutely, to have them, and I've said that a number of times. Perception goes a long ways, and if they go by a site and it looks dirty, or the weeds are growing, or there's mortalities laying out front, I mean, it automatically would say, okay, if it looks like that on the outside, what's going on in there? And so, Chad, a very good point. Keep them in neat as tight as you can, and if they look good, and I'll just use an example of this same permitting hearing that could have been very controversial. A number of the commissioners in the zoning board have been out because where the barn is being built is just 1.5 miles. So they all go by my facility on the way out there. And during the meeting, they said, Brad, we just like to say that, wow, your site always looks nice. And to me, for a commissioner to say that to a group that's being, watching a sow barn being permitted, it went a long ways. And so, Chad, very good point. Keep things as neat as you possibly can. Perception goes a long ways.
And if I might add, I really appreciate that point, both Chad and Brad. This is Dwight. We don't think of ourselves as being producers of commodities, of having a marketing department or an effort where we're putting on that hat, marketing. And when I say marketing, it's about selling our business to others, creating that image. And every day we are selling to potential prospective employees, and even maybe young children who haven't even begun to think about what their career choice would be. And so this all ties into workplace culture. I mean, we approach all of our relationships with the various packers we work with. We call them our customers because obviously they send us the checks. They are our source of funds, and they are our customer. Historically, there's been this tendency to have adversarial relationships with those who we rely on very heavily, who we market our products to. And there's that whole image is, whether it's to the veterinarian, the lender, all the professionals, the stakeholders who we welcome to our businesses. And we obviously want to attract professionals, right? I mean, we want to attract the best veterinarians. We want to attract the lenders who believe in us and have confidence long-term, in addition to employees. And so that whole, image and marketing that image is something we need to be cognizant every day when we operate our businesses. I mean, we are professionals, and we shouldn't apologize for that.
So when you talk about workplace culture, Dwight, why is that crucial to farms' long-term success?
Well, so Jessica obviously shared the challenges that they have, and they certainly are not unique to large organizations. Ours is much smaller. We would have just shy of 50 full-time employees in our entire business. But yeah, the TN visa, even at that, has not been a slam dunk. I mean, we had our first TN visa employee join our organization 5 years ago. Today, we're at 15. We anticipate that number and the percentage of our employees will continue to expand. But even for them, workplace culture, I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what culture you come from. Workplace culture is about creating an environment where people come to work every day because they love what they do and they love the people they work with. And quite frankly, if you have a great workplace culture, those who don't fit the culture, they won't last very long. So you don't really need to terminate a poor employee. The rest of your employees will deem a poor employee as poison, will expect you to terminate them. Now, fortunately, we haven't had to do that, and our turnover rate is quite low. And obviously, with the pool of candidates being pretty slim, we're probably willing to grant grace and mercy, perhaps a little longer than we typically would. But don't be afraid to let somebody go when it's not working, even if you are shorthanded. In fact, your employees would actually rather do more work with less people rather than to have poison. When I say poison, meaning an employee who is not carrying their weight and being part of the workplace a positive workplace culture. Now, my daughter, she went to college all about production, animal science, fully expected that she was going to immerse herself in production. And she's our HR department, and I call her informally the mother of our farm. And so workplace culture, especially when you're working with a workforce that is immigrating or moving to your area, depends on integrating them into your community as well. They're obviously not going to be working all the time. So what are you doing to help your people become integrated into the community and making sure that they're having positive experiences, as well as your community having a positive experience with your workforce? And so it goes far beyond actually the actual workplace. It's about their impact on the community and how you help get them to become an active part of your community. And so it's been actually very rewarding for my daughter, and it's been very rewarding for me as her father, as well as my uncles, to observe our next generation just really take the bull by the horns and create a much better workplace culture than what we ever created before our children were active managers in the farm.
So I know, Chad, you wanted to talk about employee retention, which might correlate with workplace culture.
No doubt it correlates with the culture. We've been fortunate to have longtime employees here, and part of that culture is what that communicates to the next generation of employees coming to the farm. We're long past the days of seeking farmhands. Nobody really aspires to be a farmhand anymore, or as Dad used to say, a hired man. I mean, there's just no kids that want to grow up to be hired men or farmhands. And so that culture is largely dictated by how we as management treat them, let them in on decision-making, provide clear job descriptions. Some of these things that I think maybe a number of us never grew up with, but realized for the future farm, this is what it's going to take. And so that's just another way of probably realizing that the younger generations are different than us. They think differently. And for us to be able to inspire them and motivate them, we're going to have to think differently too. And I think Dwight's point of his daughter coming back and being able to manage employees different than what her uncles and her dad did is a huge key to the success of the future of their farm. So I think all of that is part of culture, Jim.
So we're going to change tune a little bit here. Jessica, the use of antibiotics in feed for sow herds.
Yeah, so just recently we started doing that in the area that I'm at. Obviously we want to use antibiotics judiciously. That's part of our what we do in the swine industry and ag in general. But I guess I brought this topic up because I'm more interested in like where everybody else stands. We've started to use it during a PRRS outbreak to help with reproduction, performance later on. And to help with our sow mortality, because some of our PRRS breaks have been extremely high with the sow mortality. So I really was more interested in like, hey, what is everybody else's thoughts and opinions on this, and how are you using this in your farms?
So Dwight here, we have 3 farms that we source pigs from. And one of the farms, kind of similar experience to you, we implemented a the consistent use of the lactation diets of Palmitil, and have documented and have the metrics and the records to prove it, that we have significantly reduced the use of antibiotics downstream by the health of the pig that we're weaning. And so at the end of the day, I mean, that's what you got to do, is take a holistic approach and measure. And it was a little difficult. I mean, we were taught antibiotics are a tool, and you leave the tool in the box until you need it, right? And for the most part, that is the case. But there may be a place for using, like we currently are on one of the farms, we are using a continuous use of Palmitil in the lactation diet, and have documented a significant reduction in antibiotic use and health challenges downstream. And so that is a mind shift change. We still use Palmitil via the water, the AC version, strategically at our primary sow farm. But the lesson that we've learned at this other sow farm that we are a partner in and is managed by another management company has really opened our eyes to the potential of what that might mean for us in the future if we would go through a health challenge at the sow farm. Now, we always with anything that we put in diets, whether it's a feed grade or anything else that we would call novelty or a change we would tweak, we always try to challenge ourselves to audit our diets on a regular basis. And, a year or two down the road, we may want to pull it out and to see if it is still necessary, or maybe 12 months or whatever that is. So I do think we got to avoid becoming complacent and just getting at it to, well, we've always done it, right? And challenge and audit what we do on a regular basis. But that is one that's definitely been an eye opener for us.
So you've seen in decrease in antibiotics downstream. What about the sow's next piglet litter? Like, have you seen?
Yeah. So we really haven't got any significant subsequent litter performance data yet. So more to come on that. So, but yeah, we fully anticipate that, we're going to measure that. We're going to get that data and know.
And I know, Brad, you had some input on the antibiotics.
I guess I don't have any experience on as far as in the sow farm, because that's under a management team, and so I'm not there as far as on the sow. I guess my concern is the antibiotics is again, we use antibiotics judiciously, just like she said, but it is a concern to the consuming public. And so what we can do and again, it's documentation. We're part of it's called a PART program. And so we track all the antibiotics we use, and we watch that, and again, which antibiotics, which category they're falling in, and try to get the antibiotics to decrease. I wouldn't say that the goal is to get to zero antibiotics, because honestly, the welfare of the pig is going to be first. And if I need to treat an animal, I'm going to. But I brought up the antibiotic issue just because honestly, every time, I don't care which group I talk to, whether it's a group of registered dietitians or whether it's a nutritionist or whoever it is, when they ask questions, antibiotics always come up. And so the consuming public is concerned about that. So I think as producers, we need to make sure that we're using them judiciously, that we're documenting what we do, and continue the goal of reducing antibiotics, but also have that welfare of the animal in there. And so that's why I brought up the antibiotic issue. It's at the forefront of a number of people when they think of pork production or animal production, is how much antibiotics we're using and what we're doing about that to continue to reduce the amount we do.
And what about mortality, Jessica? Sow mortality?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an industry problem as a whole. Over the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen a jump in it. I think, what we've started doing is we really look at, when we look at sow mortality, there's a lot of unknowns. We just kind of go, oh, she was a sudden death. We have, a few lists of things we can categorize them at. And the only one that we really identify is lameness. So, like looking at your diets, looking at your genetics coming through the door, timely treatment and pulling them into the hospital. And then that goes into also labor shortage. When we get short on labor, it gets harder to walk every sow every day. So just our big thing right now is, getting the tissues taken, making sure we truly understand why that sow has died. And I think posting animals has not always been a thing on sow farms. We just kind of leave that to the nursery finisher phase, but we've really got into posting sows and tracking all of our data because it's a big deal. And the more we lose the younger parity animals, we don't get our return on investment for that. And then we have to hold back older period animals that create other issues for us so that we have pigs downstream.
So when we talk about mortality, Lauren, you touched on the MetaFarms production analysis.
Sure. I mean, across the board, I mean, sow mortality is very high, keeps getting higher, it feels like. I know that MetaFarms, they did a production analysis from 2017 to 2021. They saw elevated mortality across all phases. The sow death loss, there was about 12%. Pre-weaning mortality had a range of 8 to 20%. And it was at a 5-year high. So that was like remarkable for me. I mean, we certainly saw some challenges here in the past 18 months as a wean to finish system. Comes from a lot of lateral diseases. You talked about antibiotic use here, judicious use. When we're combating so many diseases, it feels like it's the only tools in our tool belt is throw some antibiotics at it, right? See what we can get to work to keep the pigs alive because it is a welfare issue. We're very concerned about mortality, right? It's a black eye for our industry when you talk about those numbers, losing 12% of sows and maybe 20% of pigs on an individual farm. If we're losing a quarter of animals, 1 out of 4, that's a real black eye for our industry and something that we need to really challenge ourselves with. So we all need to be on board, nutritionists, geneticists, your veterinarians. We need to be really solving this issue because it doesn't feel like it's getting better at the moment. And that is a big concern for me as a veterinarian. We recently have seen a drop in our mortality across our system, but it came with an increase in treatments and really honing in on that. So we're talking about lameness here. You mentioned Prop 12. That's a huge concern for me. I mean, larger pens, it seems better, but more area for them to run, harder to get to them for treatment, more square footage to walk for that individual caretaker, right? So I think there's some challenges with Prop 12 that are coming with our labor force. And that's not, nobody talks about that as a welfare issue, but it certainly is. So as more farms go to open pens, more farms go to Prop 12, we're going to be treating more sows. Our genetics haven't kept up with that progress. They're looking at pig numbers, producing more pigs, and we really haven't focused on structure, longevity of the sow, and robustness. So I think that's something that we really need to look into on the genetic side, and I don't unfortunately touch much of that. So we're reliant on our genetic partners, right, to make the improvements there. And as an industry, we as producers can push for it and just continue to talk about it, right? Our mortality is unacceptable. Help us out here, create that robustness. We need some more robustness genes in the genetics. Primary contributors to our wean to finish death loss continue to be PRRS, lateral PRRS, E. coli, salmonella. So I think, our industry is also going to be challenged there with FSIS and what's going to come with the salmonella regulations. We're probably going to have to change some of our practices, and maybe that does have to force us to use more antibiotics, right, to control that, different feed mitigation strategies. But, I feel like we just continue to face more and more challenges, and those challenges are not necessarily helping our mortality any, right? They're just kind of causing us more problems and more burden. But I know that we can be successful and overcome them at the same time. So that's a good challenge for me as a vet, and I kind of look forward to it. We're going to fix a lot of these problems.
We've got 3 more questions left, and we'll get to that final question. So Chad, feed costs, why is that a concern? Is it still a concern to you?
Yeah, I think feed costs are going to continue to be a concern. I don't know what corn's worth really right now. It's hard to say. I think you can get anywhere of a range from $4.50 to $7.50 to get people to say what corn's really worth. But when you think about a finishing pig eating 8 bushel of corn roughly in its lifetime, and you say $1, $2 a range on corn, it is a significant contributor. And so I just think feed costs continue to be at the forefront of our minds. Maybe not so much as interest costs now. That's certainly changed recently, but I think feed costs continue to be at the forefront and will be for some time.
So Brad and Dwight, there's a couple topics that correlate together. Dwight, sustainability metrics. I know Brad is interested in sustainability and new technologies. So that's interesting. And then the second part of it, just what does the future look like for independent producers? I know there's a lot there, but We'll start with you, Dwight.
Well, for me to be concise in addressing those topics or questions will be a challenge, but let's talk about sustainability. Obviously, it's kind of the new sexy term, regenerative agriculture, carbon farming, or carbon footprint. Really, they all fall into our farming practices that we have embraced and labeled differently over the years, but is kind of what I call, circular production, meaning we raise the livestock near where our feed source is. We return the manure as nutrients to next year's crop, which is the feedstuffs for next year's herd. And that's not a new concept. But again, this whole message that Brad was alluding to as we speak with those who don't understand agriculture, and quite frankly, if we're not proactive enough, we will get painted in a much more negative light than what we are deserving of. And we actually, quite frankly, are and can continue to be a big solution to the climate solutions. Now that, I don't want to tell anybody where they should stand on quote climate change. I think I can make a case that climate has always changed. Is it changing more rapidly today than not? I mean, possibly, but just the fact that we sequester carbon with how we raise food is an incredible story. And we need to document that and have those metrics and communicate that to the consumers, and then potentially monetize it for those who recognize that they are having a negative impact on the climate and want to, through carbon trading, we actually could be in a position if we get our act together where we could actually have a surge of economic development in rural America if we figure out a good, efficient way to monetize carbon sequestration and trade that on an open and free exchange. And so I do think this whole concept of sustainability is something that we should not ignore and not be afraid of, because we tend to think that it's a progressive issue, and that might not align with our politics. But at the end of the day, it's about stewardship. It's about leaving the land in a better situation than what it was when we received it from those who farmed it before we did. And we can learn a lot from countries where they farmed the land for multiple centuries versus the land that we farm. Well, a lot of that was sod that was broken in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And so we're really quite young here, our industry, as compared to where agriculture is in a lot of places across the globe. And so I'll just leave it at that. And maybe Brad's got some other comments on the sustainability front.
Well, and I think you did a very good job, Dwight, of explaining. And again, I think documenting, and again, we've got a packer now that we're doing, and it's a requirement. I mean, the electricity we're using, the water we're using, the manure we're producing, the feed that we're consuming, the distance we haul our feed, all of that stuff is put down. And so at the end of the year, we get a carbon footprint, basically a calculator, and it shows this is how much per pound of pork come off my farm. And again, what that number means, but the goal is that next year that number is a little bit less than what it was. And so you got to track what you're doing. And again, I think you brought up the point when you start, we as farmers, we base so much stuff on science. I mean, whether it's GMO crops or antibiotic use, you say, you know what, the science shows that this is safe, and the science that. At the same time, when people get pretty offensive when you start talking about climate change and what, like Dwight said, whatever side of the fence you're on. But again, we're putting these metrics together to prove that we are trying to be more sustainable, continue that, all in the wake of our customers, whether it's the packer we sell to or the consumer, that buys it at the grocery store. It's at their forefront. And so again, we're doing a great job. We've got a great story. Don't be afraid to share that, but also don't be, when they're asking what's happening on the farms, be willing to share that. So again, it's down to the communications. It's not being defensive. If somebody says, what are you doing to help in climate change? Well, here's what we're doing on our farms. We're trying to be more sustainable. And this is actually what we're doing. And we're documenting that. It's a great story. We as agriculturalists and pig farmers have great stories. We need not to be afraid to share them. And at the same time, not be defensive. Back to my other point of communicating with public, and sustainability is the same way. It's maybe the buzzword now. It's things that we've been as farmers been doing for a number of years. Now they've added a word to it. So let's grab a hold of it and run with it, because we got a great story.
Any thoughts on new technologies?
Oh, I guess I would. And again, what's the next? I was on a panel here a while back and they said, what's the next technology coming? You think how far advanced the farms, pig farm. I'm thinking 15 years ago, we still had some sows on dirt lots. How far we've come in our industry. What is the next technology out there? I mean, is it infrared sensors that are on our pigs and they can tell? Is it, you know, these controllers? Imagine what our controllers have done. And so again, what took maybe 10 years to change is might be done in a year. I mean, the technology is moving so fast and it's just amazing. And so I need to have my son or my other employee that's that same generation. I'm probably a poor one to ask that, but again, the technology that's out there and how it will advance, it's amazing, and it's just happening faster. And so there's a number of things I think that's going to help us in the sustainability story. Is there going to be things out there that can change the ventilation, you know, by using infrared sensors on the pigs? And hey, they don't need to be that. I don't know what's for sure is coming. There's a lot of neat things happening in agriculture, and honestly, that's what's going to draw this next generation, you know, wanting to be part of agriculture if they know what this is all about, because we're on cutting edge on what we do on farms, and people want to be part of that. We just need to let them know what's out here. So
Lauren, are we facing political and packer pressures to change production practices?
In my opinion, absolutely. I can name like several instances where I've seen in just my short career as a swine vet, right, almost 6 years now, but very short, where packer and consumer have influenced our production practices. I mean, one example here that really is recent is the Prop 12 conversation, right? We'll see what the Supreme Court decides in October, but certainly go Prop 12, right? California, Massachusetts, just ballot initiatives resulting in major production changes across the industry. I think that's huge, right? Where we as producers are meeting political pressure demands and changing our production practices, whether it's for the good or not. It's still left to be determined, right? There's no science behind some of these decisions that are being made. Another example could be the Duroc sire influence from the genetic side. It's all about labeling, I think, from the packers on that aspect. And I've seen a lot of influence on the Duroc sire here in the past few years. I go to boar studs, I get to see that over time. I mean, I've seen it go from a very white genetic to very much a lot of brown Duroc boars in the stud, and that comes with other challenges downstream. Could that have contributed to our hemolytic E. coli issues that we had in the past 2 years as an industry? There's a lot of Duroc influence in there, and maybe there's more receptors in the gut. So just two examples there. We also have the COVID-19 example. I mean, goodness, with the plant shutdowns, what havoc that caused across the industry. We were impacted, right? We gave up slots on the line for other producers that were having to come to the decision, do I euthanize these pigs or not? And that was simply, I really felt like media driven, hyped up. I mean, there were other companies that were in, and you know, there people were making cars, just felt like it was heavily influenced on pork. A lot of full market value pigs that unfortunately were euthanized during that time, and that came from like political and media pressure. So I just think, you know, this industry, we're really susceptible to it, and at some point we do need to stand strong and united and say that this is not in the best interest of our pigs. There might be that time to come. We're probably not there today, but we need to make sure that we stand unified and do the best things for the animals and have their best interest in mind from a welfare standpoint, and you know, try to avoid why we come into the spotlight sometimes, like when it came to like the COVID-19 plant shutdowns. I'm not sure why that all came about, but we were really scrutinized as an industry, and I felt like that was a little bit unfair. But just some examples from my perspective on how fragile we are and how susceptible we are to influence.
We'll get
So I
everyone.
have a question for everyone on that. Like, how do we find our voice as an industry then?
So maybe clarify that question one more time, Jessica.
Well, like with, you know, like you said, we're very susceptible to decisions that are made for us, basically, that impact our daily farm operations. So how do we as an industry find our voice to stand up against those? And like, is it an uneducated thing? So people are uneducated, so they're making these decisions?
I guess I would make a comment. Part of it is, Jessica, again, a lot of the folks don't understand how farms have changed. The other thing is, and don't ever forget, I mean, we've got our trade organizations, and I'm gonna, you know, I'm very passionate about that. I was part of National Pork Board. I've been MPPC. Until you're part of that, or till your producers are part of that and understand and go to some of the meetings and get some of what they're actually doing for us every day. And this isn't but I truly have seen it firsthand. I mean, they are out in DC meeting with legislators, and I mean, they really are. It's amazing. And so that's another thing. I mean, you've got employees and larger farms, get them involved, because I'll tell you, the ones that are holding them offices and making the travel, I mean, they're producers too. It just takes everybody, but they truly are fighting. I'll tell you what, I've witnessed it firsthand on whichever side, whether it's pork board side or MPP side. But you get, as there's less people on the farms. I mean, here in South Dakota, we have 12 legislators in our total Senate and representatives in South Dakota that have an ag background. I don't know how much more rural and how much less population you get than South Dakota, but there's 12 out in pure South Dakota that are making decisions for South Dakota that come off a farm. And so just take that onto the other states. And so somebody has to do that in your trade organizations. And I feel very fortunate. I raise cattle, so I guess I think I can talk about that. The cattle industry is so divided, it's unbelievable. And I've seen, you got 5, 6 different organizations and they don't agree on anything. And I'll say that, whereas the pork, they aren't. They truly are, have every pork producer interest at heart. And they're fighting, but it's a tough battle. I mean, it takes a lot of money, and there's some big powerhouse, activist groups or whatever that are against our cause. And so I just say, get involved, encourage your employees to be involved some way. It takes a lot of people and a lot of numbers to get it done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and your organization has been very supportive, Jessica. Chad Groves, I don't know if you know Chad, but he's recently elected to the National Pork Board. Phenomenal individual. I've had a couple of opportunities to engage Chad, but I mean, all of our businesses need to be thinking about doing our part and getting involved. Now, it's difficult. It's a lot of commitment. I was encouraged quite a few years ago, and my wife, who's much wiser than I, kind of held me back while our children were younger. But yeah, I've gotten involved the last 6, 7 years, and it's been very rewarding, very eye-opening, and we appreciate those of us who are serving in both our state and national organizations, feedback and input, because we truly need to be grassroots. I mean, it cannot be a top-down organization, and I don't feel we are. But please never feel that your voice doesn't count, because it really does.
Jessica, on your question, I'm a big believer in control and be concerned with what you can control. And so in this vein, what can we do as producers? Be good stewards, do what we can, right? Keep our facilities in good condition, like we talked about earlier, spreading a good message, educating people, not being combative, right? Just coming with the sense of understanding that, a lot of people out there, the majority, right? Only 1% of people are in agriculture, think that, pork comes from the grocery store. It comes out of my meat cooler. It's not from the farm, right? So I think that education, being good stewards, doing the best we can as producers, and having the welfare of our pigs in mind. I mean, that's the message that we could probably move forward, and, we can control that. And some of this stuff is big and political and driven by a lot of money and some entities that don't have our best interest in mind. So control what we can control and do what you can do.
Mm-hmm. And don't be afraid of the media. I mean, be sincere, engage them. I'm just an example. Was contacted a week ago by a reporter for Iowa Public Radio. It became very obvious to me. She was wanting to interview me on the Prop 12 issue, which I'm very passionate about that particular issue. And but it became very obvious to me that she's never been on a modern pig farm before. And so I extended her the invite to spend the day with us. And she's going to be here this coming Friday. And she's literally can hardly wait. I mean, all the materials that I sent to her, the communication I given her, I've already opened up her world to what a modern pig farm is like. And she literally had no idea. And so I'm looking forward to it. She's looking forward to it. And whenever I've had those experiences in the past, they've been extremely rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
Continue to communicate and tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're going to wrap on a rapid fire final question to each panel member. We'll start with Dwight. What's your definition of leadership, Dwight?
Well, probably all goes back to what many of us have been taught, or at least I would like to think many of us were taught about the golden rule: others first, and then don't worry about self. So selfless leadership is really taking care of others. And so in our organization, it's an acknowledgement and recognition that our frontline employees, the people who are at slat level, the people who are loading the pigs, they are the most important. And so we've designed our reporting mechanisms to put into their hands timely, real-time reports. We call it leading indicators rather than lagging indicators that actually drive the profitability and the performance of our business. So think about others before you think about self.
Jessica, what's your definition of leadership?
Along the same lines as Dwight, you know, it's about other people. It's about creating an environment where everyone gets to be their best self, and just making a positive impact every single day on whoever you come in contact with.
Chad, your definition of leadership?
Yeah, at the base level, it's providing guidance to a group of people, and you have good leadership, and we've all seen poor leadership. But I think good leadership is someone that is putting others in charge of something, not micromanaging them. And then, as leaders, we often will take arrows that because we're shielding others from it. We maybe know things that we can't say because it would reveal too much, but you have to be sacrificial and be willing to take arrows as leaders.
Brad, your definition of leadership?
Well, I just think honestly, it's taking the skills or the talents that we have or an individual has and trying to use them to help others succeed. And so being mentors to people, using whatever you can to help others succeed in whatever their desires or their goals are. And so taking the skills that you have and trying to help others become better.
And finally, Lauren, what's your definition of leadership?
You know, I believe the U.S. Marines have a rule where their leaders or their officers eat last, and I believe in that, like a servant leadership, as others have described, building a good culture, right, that builds honesty, respect, loyalty, because that will breed more self-accountability and have more independent thinkers. Continuous improvement, always seeking to continuously improve and always looking in the rearview mirror and saying, hey, I could be the problem and how can I improve my team? That's how I would define a leader, in my opinion.
Well, thanks to the entire panel for taking time out of your busy day to talk hot topics in the pork industry. You can visit swineweb.com or swinetv.com.